was sitting in the conference room of my father's law firm when he said it. Calm, measured, final. You get nothing. In that moment, it felt like I had been erased from my own family's future. Every document on that table carried my sister's name. Mine was nowhere. No explanation, no hesitation. Just a quiet decision that had clearly been made long before I walked in. If you've ever been told you don't belong because you chose your own path, stay with me. This might feel familiar. 3 months before that meeting in the conference room, everything still looked intact, solid, predictable. My father, Richard Quinn, was the kind of man who believed success could be constructed the same way he built his law firm, brick by brick, rule by rule, never deviating from the blueprint. Quinn and Associates wasn't just his business, it was his legacy. In our small city, his name carried weight. People said it with respect, sometimes with fear. He wore precision like a second suit, measured words, straight posture, decisions made without visible doubt. My mother, Eleanor, moved through our home with that same quiet authority. She managed the firm's finances and our household as if they were extensions of each other. Nothing slipped past her. Bills were paid early. Dinners were timed perfectly. Conversations at the table felt curated, controlled, like even our emotions needed to stay within acceptable margins. And then there was Lydia. My sister didn't just follow the path my father laid out, she walked it as if she had rehearsed for it her entire life. Perfect grades, perfect internships, perfect postures at the dinner table. When she spoke about case law or upcoming opportunities at the firm, my father's eyes lit up in a way I rarely saw. My mother would reach across the table and touch her hand, all ready, imagining the framed diploma that would one day hang beside his. I was proud of her, I really was. But pride can be heavy when it constantly reminds you that you are the wrong kind of daughter. While they discussed clients and litigation strategies over rosemary chicken and red wine, I would sit quietly, my mind somewhere else entirely. Not in courtrooms, not in conference rooms, but inside lines of code. On an old laptop that wheezed every time it powered on, I built small programs no one else ever saw. Simple things, functional things. Tiny digital worlds that responded exactly the way I told them to. There was something comforting about that. Code didn't care about legacy. It didn't measure worth in tradition. It only asked one thing: does it work? One evening, the air in the dining room felt thicker than usual. My father set his fork down and asked about college plans. His tone was polite, but it carried expectation. The kind that isn't really a question. Lydia jumped in first, glowing as she described an internship offer through one of his senior partners. My mother's smile widened. The future was unfolding exactly as it should. Then the attention shifted to me. I could feel it before anyone spoke. The silence sharpened. I took a breath. My hands were steady, but my chest wasn't. I told them I had decided to study software engineering, that I wanted to build applications, that maybe one day I could create something that changed how people lived or worked. For a second, no one reacted. The ticking of the clock filled the space between us. My father placed his fork down slowly, not angry, not loud, just deliberate. His face didn't reveal much, but the temperature in the room dropped. My mother looked at her plate as if the food had suddenly lost its flavor. Lydia's smile froze, just slightly, but enough for me to notice. Then my father spoke. "If you walk away from law," he said evenly, "don't expect anything from me." The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. They settled into the room like something permanent. It wasn't just about money. It wasn't even about inheritance, not yet. It was about belonging, about being written into the family's future. And in that moment, I understood that choosing my own path meant choosing it alone. There's a particular kind of ache that doesn't explode. It doesn't cause a scene. It just hollows you out quietly. That's what I felt sitting there. Not rage, not rebellion. Just the realization that love in this house came with conditions. I didn't argue, I didn't plead, because arguing would have turned it into a debate. And this wasn't a debate, it was a verdict. I nodded. Dinner continued somehow. Plates were cleared, glasses refilled. The conversation drifted back to Lydia's internship as if nothing irreversible had just happened, but everything had. Later that night, I stood in my room, looking around at the walls I had grown up with, the shelves, the desk, the window that faced the quiet street. It all felt unfamiliar, like a place that had already begun letting me go. I packed slowly, not dramatically. A few clothes, my laptop, a notebook filled with half-finished code. I slipped an old family photo between the pages, not because it made me feel safe, but because I wanted to remember what I was choosing against. When I stepped outside, the air felt sharp, clean, frightening. Behind me, the house glowed warmly. From the outside, we still looked like the perfect family. Legacy intact. Future secured. I didn't look back. Some choices don't feel brave when you make them. They feel terrifying, reckless, almost foolish. But as I stood there with a single bag and no promise of support, I realized something quiet and irreversible. If their love required me to become someone else, then losing their approval might be the first honest thing I had ever done. And I walked away knowing that whatever came next, it would be mine. 6 months later, my world had shrunk to a one-bedroom apartment I shared with 2 strangers who barely spoke to me. The kitchen light flickered like it was arguing with itself. The heater worked when it felt generous. The walls were thin enough that I could hear late-night phone calls through them, breakups, laughter, arguments about rent. It wasn't comfortable. It wasn't impressive. But it was mine in a way my parents' house had never been. I worked at a coffee shop 2 blocks away. Every morning before sunrise, I tied my apron, wiped down tables that would be dirty again in an hour, and pulled espresso shots for students and office workers who rarely looked me in the eye. The machine hissed all day, steam rising like a constant exhale. I practiced small talk I didn't have the energy to sustain. Long day ahead, weather's changing again. Smile, nod, repeat. The pay barely covered my share of rent. After utilities, groceries, and bus fare, I had almost nothing left. My savings dissolved faster than I expected. Each expense felt like a quiet subtraction. There was only one thing I refused to cut. Internet access. It sounds small, almost trivial, but to me it was oxygen. Without it, I was cut off from the world I was trying to enter. So, I ate instant noodles. I drank leftover coffee from the shop. I learned to stretch $20 across a week like it was a survival skill. After my shift ended, while everyone else went home, To unwind, I walked to the public library with my old laptop tucked under my arm. It groaned every time it powered on the fan, spinning loud enough to draw glances. I didn't care. That laptop was my doorway. I taught myself JavaScript first, then Python. I followed free tutorials, paused and rewound videos, read forum threads written by strangers who had once been just as confused as I was. Sometimes I understood everything. Sometimes I stared at the screen for an hour and felt like I was trying to decode a foreign language with no dictionary. There were nights I went back to the apartment so tired my hands trembled. My roommates would already be asleep. I'd sit on my mattress back against the wall and wonder if my father had been right. If I had walked away from security for a fantasy. No one clapped for small progress. No one noticed when I finally fixed a bug that had taken me 3 days to solve. There were no dinner table conversations about my achievements. Just silence. That silence can be dangerous. It makes you question whether what you're building matters at all. One rainy evening, as I wiped down the counter near closing time, I heard a familiar voice say my name, Riley. I looked up and there she was, Aunt Diane, my father's younger sister, the one who had always felt slightly different from the rest of the family. She had once been a software engineer before leaving the corporate world to start her own tech consultancy. Growing up, she was the only adult who asked me what I liked instead of what I planned to inherit. She studied me for a moment, apron-tired eyes, hands stained faintly with coffee grounds. After we closed, we sat at one of the small tables by the window. Rain streaked the glass. I told her everything, not dramatically, just honestly. The apartment, the job, the tutorials, the doubt. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, she smiled in a way that didn't feel like pity. If you're serious about coding, she said, come to my co-working space tomorrow. There's an empty desk next to mine. That was it. No lecture. No check with a dramatic flourish, just a desk. The next day, I walked into that space and felt something shift inside me. The room hummed softly with computers and quiet conversation. Whiteboards covered the walls, layered with half-erased ideas. The smell of strong coffee lingered in the air. It wasn't glamorous, but it was alive. Diane showed me the desk, a simple wooden surface, a chair that didn't wobble, reliable Wi-Fi. Use it, she said. Build something. For the first time in months, I didn't feel invisible. She didn't hover. She didn't micromanage. She worked on her own projects, occasionally glancing over when I hit a wall. If I asked a question, she answered. If I didn't, she let me figure it out. That space changed everything. Instead of coding alone in my apartment at midnight, I now worked surrounded by quiet ambition. I started thinking bigger, not just practice scripts or tiny experiments, but something real, something useful. The idea came from my own frustration. In our apartment, everything broke. The sink leaked for weeks because none of us knew a reliable plumber. The heater failed twice before winter. Finding someone to fix anything meant endless calls, vague quotes, and waiting days for responses. What if there was a simpler way? An app that connected homeowners directly with verified local repair freelancers. No endless searching, no guesswork. Just a few taps and a solution. I called it Home Ease at first. The concept was simple. Clean interface. Search, by service, book by availability, reviews visible up front. I sketched the layout in my notebook during coffee breaks, writing ideas in the margins between code snippets. After my shifts, I rushed to the co-working space instead of the library. My routine became almost mechanical. Work, code, sleep, repeat. Line by line, the app began taking shape. The first time I saw the interface load without crashing, I just stared at the screen. It wasn't perfect. The colors were off, the buttons misaligned slightly, but it worked. It felt like watching a fragile idea grow muscle. Weeks blurred together. My bank account stayed dangerously low, but something inside me felt steadier. This wasn't just learning anymore, it was building. One afternoon, Diane mentioned a startup competition happening in Boulder that summer. Early stage founders, seed funding, exposure. You should apply, she said casually. I laughed at first. Me competing against polished teams with investors and degrees from places I had only seen online. But that night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. What was the worst that could happen? Rejection. I was familiar with that, so I refined the pitch, cleaned up the demo, recorded a shaky walkthrough on my old laptop. I renamed the app Homies. Shorter, warmer, easier to remember. The submission form asked for vision, scalability, target market. I answered each question slowly, honestly. I didn't dress it up with language I didn't understand. I just explained the problem and how I was solving it. When I finally clicked submit, my finger hovered for a second before pressing down. It felt like sending a message in a bottle into the ocean. The next morning at the cafe, as I steamed milk for a rush of customers, my phone buzzed in my apron pocket. I almost ignored it, but something made me wipe my hands and check. An email, subject line, startup competition, update. My heart started pounding before I even opened it. You've been shortlisted for the final round. For a moment, the noise of the espresso machine faded. The chatter blurred. I read the sentence 3 times to make sure it didn't change. Shortlisted. I stood there surrounded by customers who had no idea my entire world had just tilted. It wasn't a win, not yet. But for the first time since I walked out of my parents' house with a single bag, I felt something stronger than survival. I felt possibility. That summer in Boulder felt different. The air itself seemed charged, like the city was quietly daring people to try something bigger than themselves. I arrived at the startup competition with my old laptop tucked under my arm and a heart that refused to slow down. Around me were founders with polished decks, matching team shirts and vocabulary that sounded like it belonged in boardrooms I'd never stepped into. And then there was me. When it was my turn, I stood in front of the room and opened Homies. The interface was still rough around the edges. The design wasn't sleek, but the problem was real. I talked about broken heaters, leaking pipes, the frustration of not knowing who to trust when something in your home falls apart. I didn't try to sound impressive. I just told the truth. Afterward, during one of the networking sessions, Aunt Diane introduced me to someone she had known for years, Alan Brooks. Alan was in his early 50s with calm eyes and the kind of patience that comes from watching trends rise and fall without panicking. He listened more than he spoke. When Diane told him about my app, he didn't interrupt or rush to conclusions. He asked questions, precise ones. How will you verify freelancers? What happens when a job goes wrong? How do you scale trust? Some of them I could answer immediately. Others caught me off guard. He nodded slowly. "Let's meet next week," he said. "I want to see what you've built in detail." That single sentence changed the rhythm of my life. A week later, I sat across from him in the co-working space, my laptop open between us. I walked him through the code, the matching system, the user flow. I braced myself for him to point out everything that was wrong. He didn't ignore the flaws, but he didn't focus on them either. "There's something honest about this," he said quietly. "You built it because you needed it." Then he made an offer. He would mentor me and provide early-stage funding to help refine and scale the app. In exchange, he'd take a small equity share. Not control, not dominance, a partnership. I didn't hesitate. For months, my life became a cycle of coffee code and exhaustion, but it was different from before. Back then I was surviving. Now I was constructing something. Alan met with me twice a week. He was firm in a way that forced growth. If I rushed through a presentation, he stopped me. "Take your time," he'd say. "Precision now saves you later." He challenged assumptions. He pushed me to think about infrastructure, user retention, dispute resolution. Things I hadn't even considered when I was just trying to make the app function. Meanwhile, Diane remained my quiet anchor. One evening, after I complained about how slow everything felt, how success still seemed just out of reach, she looked up from her laptop and said something that settled into me like a stone dropped in water. "Build it with purpose," she said, "not revenge." The words stung a little, because if I was honest, part of me still wanted to prove something. To show my father that walking away hadn't broken me, that I wasn't reckless or naive. But Diane was right. If homies existed just to prove someone wrong, it would never be steady. It would burn too fast. So I shifted. Instead of thinking about what I had lost, I focused on what I was creating. I redesigned the onboarding process to make it intuitive for people who weren't tech-savvy. I refined the color palette to feel calm and trustworthy. I rewrote sections of code that technically worked, but weren't scalable. There were nights I stayed at the co-working space until dawn, my hands aching from typing. The city outside would fall silent, then slowly wake again as I was still debugging. But I didn't feel hollow anymore. I felt driven. When we finally prepared to launch the first public version on the App Store, my stomach twisted in a way that reminded me of that competition email. Except this time, there was no panel of judges, just the entire world. I uploaded the build, and then I waited. The first download notification came in quietly. Just a number, changing from 0 to 1. I stared at it. Somewhere out there, someone I didn't know had trusted something I made enough to install it on their phone. Then 2 downloads, then 5. The first review appeared a few days later. This app saved my weekend. I read it 3 times. It was from a woman in Denver who found a plumber in under an hour. No drama, no endless calls. Then another review from Seattle, then Chicago. The growth wasn't explosive overnight, but it was steady, organic, real. Alan and I studied the analytics together. User behavior, drop-off points, retention rates. Each week, we adjusted, improved, optimized. The numbers began climbing faster than I could emotionally process. 1,000 active users, then 3,000, 5. The day we crossed 10,000 active users, I didn't celebrate immediately. I just sat in the office staring at the dashboard. 10,000 people using something I built from scratch. A local tech website published an article soon after. My photo sat awkwardly under a headline about a self-taught founder redefining home services. I almost didn't recognize myself in it. Alan called that night. "You've done something remarkable," he said simply. The word remarkable felt too large. But gratitude filled every corner of me. Not just for him, for Diane, for that empty desk, for the version of myself who used to give up when no one was watching. By the time I turned 28, Homies was no longer an experiment. It was a company. We moved into a modest office overlooking downtown Boulder. The space hummed with the same energy I had once felt on my first day at the co-working space, but now it was ours. Developers, designers, marketing specialists, young, ambitious minds debating features and updates with a kind of restless excitement. I traded my old laptop for a proper workstation, but I still arrived early some mornings before anyone else. I'd watch the lights spill across the city and think about that girl who once counted coins to afford internet access. The milestones kept coming. Partnerships with regional repair chains, collaborations with universities, an initiative offering free home services to single parents who couldn't afford urgent repairs. Each step made the platform feel less like an app and more like something alive. For the first time, I wasn't building in reaction to rejection. I was building because I could. Because creation felt better than resentment ever did. And as Homies gained momentum, investors calling invitations arriving the company name. Spreading beyond Boulder, I realized something quietly powerful. I had stopped trying to prove I belong. I was too busy creating something that spoke for itself. By the time I turned 28, the view outside my office window looked nothing like the street I once walked with a single bag and no plan. Downtown Boulder stretched out beneath me, morning light, catching on glass buildings, cyclists weaving through traffic, the quiet hum of a city already in motion. Inside our office, the air carried the familiar scent of coffee and overheated laptops. Only now the laptops weren't wheezing relics. They were lined across long tables where developers argued gently over features and designers debated shades of blue like it actually mattered. And it did. Homies had grown beyond anything I imagined when I first sketched it between coffee shifts. We weren't just connecting homeowners with freelancers anymore. We were building trust systems, safety protocols, verified training partnerships. We hired carefully, not just for skill, but for curiosity, for people who cared about solving real problems. I remember the first time I signed an offer letter for someone else. It felt surreal, a quiet reversal of everything I'd once feared. Instead of wondering if I would be chosen, I was choosing who would help shape something bigger than me. The partnerships came next. Regional repair chains that once would have ignored a small startup now reached out to collaborate. Universities invited us to speak to their students about entrepreneurship. Our weekly metrics meetings turned into strategic planning sessions about expansion, sustainability, impact. There were days I had to pause just to breathe it in, not because I was overwhelmed in a fragile way, but because I was steady, grounded. The urgency that once drove me had softened into something more durable. That year, I received an invitation to speak at a technology conference in San Francisco. I stared at the email longer than I cared to admit. Years earlier, I had stood in a kitchen explaining why I didn't want to study law. Now, I was being asked to stand on a stage and explain how I built a company from scratch. When I stepped onto that stage in San Francisco, the lights were warm and blinding. Rows of faces looked back at me. Founders, investors, students scribbling notes. I could have listed numbers, growth charts, revenue milestones. Instead, I told them about rejection. I told them about sitting at a dinner table where love felt conditional, about walking away from certainty with nothing but an old laptop and an unstable internet connection, about nights when doubt was louder than ambition. And then I told them about purpose, how building something just to prove someone wrong will exhaust you, how creation rooted in meaning lasts longer than pride. I could see it in the audience. The subtle nods, the stillness. People weren't responding to success. They were responding to the honesty. The applause afterward wasn't explosive. It was warm, sustained. But what stayed with me were the conversations off stage. A young developer who said she felt invisible in her own family. A founder who admitted he had started his company out of anger and was burning out fast. I realized then that homies wasn't the only thing I had built. I had built a story that belonged to more than just me. Around that time, Aunt Diane announced she was retiring. She said it casually, like she was just switching grocery stores. She wanted to travel, to rest, to let her knees complain somewhere scenic. We had lunch at the same cafe where I once worked behind the counter. Sitting across from her in that familiar space felt like time folding in on itself. I told her about the conference, the new office lease, the partnerships. She listened the way she always had without trying to claim credit. Before we left, I handed her an envelope. Inside were documents transferring a meaningful share of homies into her name. She frowned immediately. "Riley, this isn't necessary." "Yes, it is," I said. "You gave me a desk when I had nothing. You gave me space to build without judgment. That changed everything." Her eyes softened in a way that made my throat tighten. For the first time, I fully understood how much of my courage had been borrowed from her belief. She didn't argue after that. Success, I had learned, isn't louder when it's real. It's quieter, more intentional. Less about proving someone wrong and more about honoring the people who stood beside you when no one else did. Back in Boulder, our office continued to buzz with plans for expansion. We discussed new markets, new features, new initiatives. My days were full, but not frantic. I no longer woke up with the need to validate my existence. I was simply building. Some mornings, I would stand by the window before anyone else arrived and let the silence settle around me. The girl who once felt erased had become someone steady enough to create her own future, and for a while that felt like enough. The news alert appeared on my phone on an ordinary afternoon. I almost ignored it. Quinn, an associate's under investigation for financial misconduct. For a second, I thought it had to be a different Quinn, a different firm. My father's name had always sounded immovable, like something carved into stone. Investigation didn't belong next to it, but it was real. I read the article slowly. Allegations of financial irregularities, questionable transfers, internal audits. The firm that had once defined success in our family was now being questioned by the same system my father had trusted his entire life. I didn't feel triumph. I felt unsettled. Over the next few days, more reports surfaced. Clients withdrawing, partners distancing themselves. Lydia, who had taken on operational responsibilities after law school, was quoted in a brief statement, promising cooperation and transparency. I could picture her perfect posture, controlled tone, trying to hold together something that was already cracking. At night, I found myself staring at the ceiling longer than usual. Was this what collapse looked like from the inside? The quiet panic behind closed doors, the silence at a dinner table that once felt so certain. Then my phone rang. Mom. Her name on the screen felt heavier than the headline had. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times. When I finally answered, her voice was softer than I remembered. Careful. As if I might disappear if she spoke too loudly. Riley, she said your father wants to talk. Not an apology, not an explanation, just a request. For a moment I didn't respond. I could almost hear my father's old tone in the silence. The certainty, the authority, the way he once told me what I wouldn't receive. But something had shifted since then. I'll call tomorrow, I said evenly. I didn't call. Instead, 2 days later, my assistant told me there were visitors in the lobby. She didn't need to say who. When I stepped toward the glass doors and saw them waiting, the inevitability of it all settled into my chest. My father stood rigid, hands clasped behind his back like he was preparing for a courtroom argument. My mother stood beside him, composed but pale. Lydia lingered half a step behind, gripping her handbag too tightly. I led them into the conference room. My conference room? The walls were glass. The skyline stretched out behind me. For a moment, no one spoke. My father glanced around the space, not with admiration, but assessment, calculating value. Finally, he cleared his throat. We came to talk about the company. His voice still carried weight, but there was a faint tremor beneath it. Mom added quickly, "You've done very well, Riley. We're proud of you." The word proud landed strangely. I waited. "Your mother and I," my father continued, "believe it's only fair that we receive our share." I tilted my head slightly. "Your share? We raised you," he said. "We gave you your foundation. Without us, you wouldn't be where you are. 50% is reasonable." 50%. He said it as if it were a negotiation over property lines, as if my life had been a joint investment. "It's not about greed," he added. "It's about fairness." Fairness? The word echoed in the room. For a split second, I felt the old chill, the girl standing at the dinner table, trying to justify her own existence. But that feeling passed quickly. I leaned back in my chair. "Do you remember what you told me?" I asked quietly. He frowned. "When I said I wanted to study software engineering, you said if I walked away from law, I shouldn't expect anything from you." Silence. "You gave me nothing," I continued. "No funding, no support, not even belief." My mother's eyes glistened. "We just want to fix things," she said, "to make it fair again." "Fair," I repeated softly. Fair would have been letting me choose without punishment. Lydia finally looked up. There was something raw in her expression. Exhaustion, maybe regret. "I didn't know it would end like this," she whispered. "Neither did I replied. My father's jaw tightened. "You're being ungrateful." The word didn't sting the way it once would have. "Gratitude looks different when you build something from nothing," I said calmly. The air in the room felt dense, heavy, with years of unspoken expectations. My father pushed his chair back, the sound scraping sharply against the floor. "This doesn't have to be difficult," he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "It already was," I answered. No one had prepared him for this version of me, the one who didn't argue, didn't raise her voice, didn't need approval. Mom stood slowly. Lydia followed. For a brief moment, our reflections overlapped and the glass walls past and present blurred together. No one said goodbye. They walked out the way they had once walked out of my choices without understanding them. When the door closed, the room fell silent again. I stood there alone, staring at the skyline. I expected to feel anger or satisfaction. Instead, I felt clarity. They had built their world on expectation. I had built mine on freedom. And for the first time, I understood that the power had shifted, not because I took anything from them, but because I had finally stopped asking for it. The second time they came, they did not come alone. Riley had been expecting it. Her assistant knocked softly on the glass wall of her office. "There's a Mr. and Mrs. Quinn here. And an attorney." Riley closed her laptop without a flicker of surprise. The sunlight from Pearl Street filtered through the tall windows, catching the framed photo on her shelf, her and Aunt Diane in front of the first tiny co-working desk they'd shared years ago. She straightened it slightly. "Send them in," she said. Her parents entered with the same posture they once carried into charity galas' shoulders. Back expressions composed, only now the confidence looked forced, brittle around the edges. The man beside them, sharply dressed and precise, carried a leather portfolio and a rehearsed neutrality. Riley Lydia began as though this were a luncheon. "We're hoping to resolve this civilly." The lawyer took over. He outlined their claim implied familial contribution, early intellectual influence, moral equity. He used phrases like constructive trust and unjust enrichment. He spoke as though Riley's company were a family heirloom that had somehow been misplaced. Riley listened without interrupting. When he finished, she folded her hands calmly on the desk. "My parents did not fund my education," she said evenly. "They did not provide housing. They did not invest capital. They did not contribute labor, intellectual property, or mentorship. There is no contract written or implied. I built this company after I left their home with 2 suitcases." The lawyer's expression shifted, slightly professional caution. Her father leaned forward. "We raised you. That has value." "Yes," Riley replied, "and I left with nothing." There was no heat in her voice. That was what unsettled them most. The meeting ended quickly. Riley's legal team had already reviewed everything. The claim would move forward formally, but it had no foundation. Still, lawsuits, even baseless ones, take time. Months passed. Prototypes, her funding rounds, her prototypes, her funding rounds, her shareholder agreements. She provided documentation of every investment, especially the one that mattered most, the early stake she had transferred to Diane long ago. There was nothing to contest. The judge's dismissal came on a gray morning in late autumn. The ruling was concise. No evidence of partnership, no proof of financial or operational contribution, no legal grounds for ownership. Case dismissed. When her attorney called, Riley was reviewing quarterly growth projections. "It's over," he said. "They have no claim." Riley closed her eyes for a moment. Not in relief exactly, more like acknowledgement. "Thank you," she said. She did not celebrate. News of the dismissal spread quietly through local business circles, though not publicly in the way scandals do. It was handled with discretion. Riley insisted on that. There would be no press statements, no victory interviews. She had no interest in humiliating them, but consequences moved through their lives regardless. The house on Maplewood Drive was sold. The firm, Quinn and Associates, never recovered from the earlier investigation. Clients had withdrawn quickly, investors even faster. The legal scrutiny combined with financial instability fractured what remained. Lydia's professional license was suspended pending further review. It was framed as temporary, but in their world, reputation was everything. And reputation had evaporated. Old friends stopped calling, invitations stopped arriving. The quiet they had once imposed on Riley now settled over them. Occasionally, fragments of news reached her through acquaintances. A condo downsized, a car returned, social memberships lapsed. She felt nothing dramatic. No satisfaction, no vengeance fulfilled, only distance. One evening, Riley found herself walking alone along Boulder Creek after work. The air was cool, the mountains sharp against the fading sky. She thought about the courtroom, not the words spoken, but the faces. Her father had looked smaller than she remembered. Her mother brittle. For years, Riley had imagined that if this moment ever came, if the balance shifted, she would feel vindicated, powerful. Instead, she felt steady. The lawsuit had not reopened old wounds. It had confirmed something she had already learned long ago in a cramped apartment with unreliable heating and a flickering Wi-Fi signal. She owed no one her survival. She had built her life without their help, and she would continue building it without their permission. That was all. Later that week, she visited Diane's house for dinner. The kitchen smelled like rosemary and roasted vegetables. It felt unchanged, warm, grounded. "It's done," Diane asked gently. "Yes, and how do you feel?" Riley considered the question. "Clear," she said finally. Diane studied her for a moment, then smiled. "Good. Clarity is expensive, but it's worth everything." Riley laughed softly. There was no anger left to carry, no need to prove a point. The lawsuit had not been a battle for ownership of a company. It had been the final attempt to reclaim control over her story, and it had failed. When Riley returned to her office the next morning, she paused at the entrance before stepping inside. The building buzzed with quiet productivity design meetings, engineering stand-ups, marketing calls. Her team trusted her. Her users depended on her. Her work mattered. That was the life she had chosen, not as rebellion, not as revenge, but as creation. She walked to her desk, opened her laptop, and resumed refining a new feature release scheduled for winter. Outside, the mountains stood unchanged. Inside, Riley felt something even more solid: peace. When the Quinn & Associates building quietly went up for sale, Riley did not hesitate. The brick facade still carried the polished confidence of another era, but inside the offices were empty glass walls echoing with absence. She bought it without announcement and began renovations immediately. Within months, the brass plaque was replaced. Homie's Learning Center, a space for young developers who couldn't afford tuition. Free workshops, mentorship labs, rows of refurbished laptops where polished conference tables once stood. At the opening ceremony, Riley stood beneath soft morning light filtering through the atrium windows. "I built my first version of this company in a room, barely big enough for a bed," she said. "All I had was internet access and time. If you have those two things, you can build more than you think. This center exists for anyone starting from nothing." No mention of her parents, no bitterness. That evening, she drove past her old family house. The lawn was different, the paint a new color. It felt smaller than she remembered. She didn't stop long. Later, she sat at Diane's kitchen table, the same warm light, the same steady presence. A week after the center opened, a letter arrived. Lydia's handwriting, brief, an apology without excuses. Riley folded it carefully and placed it in a drawer. Not forgiveness spoken aloud, not reconciliation, just acceptance. Success had once felt like proof. Now it felt like peace. Riley learned that starting from nothing isn't always a loss. Sometimes it's freedom. When no one hands you a future, you get to build your own. Your worth isn't decided by who overlooks you or walks away. It's shaped by the path you choose anyway. If you've ever felt dismissed or unseen, this is your reminder you are not behind, you are beginning. Share your thoughts below and stay connected for more stories like this.